The air inside the Hinterkaifeck farmhouse was still, but something dark lingered in the silence. For days, the Gruber family's farm remained oddly alive, smoke rising from the chimney, animals fed, and yet no one had seen the family. When neighbors finally entered the barn, their horror was complete. There, buried under piles of hay, were the bodies. 6 members of the household, their lives brutally unalived. And yet, whoever had done it hadn't fled. No, they had stayed, hidden in the shadows, living among the dead. But why, and where had they gone? In the remote countryside of Bavaria, 6 people met a gruesome and unexplainable fate at a small farmstead known as Hinterkaifeck. The Gruber family lived a quiet life there, tucked away from the world. But in March of 1922, their peaceful existence was shattered by a crime so horrific that it still haunts the town to this day. What makes this story truly terrifying is not just the brutality of the crime, but the strange, eerie events leading up to it. Events that suggest the family may have been stalked by an unseen presence long before the killings. This is the story of the Hinterkaifeck murders, a dark and forgotten chapter of real-life horror. Hinterkaifeck was isolated, even for rural standards. The Gruber family, Andreas Gruber, his wife Cäzilia, their daughter Viktoria, and her 2 children along with their maid, lived in near seclusion, miles away from the nearest neighbors. In the months leading up to the massacre, Andreas began noticing strange occurrences around the property. Footprints in the snow appeared one day, leading from the woods to the house, but none leading back. He searched the grounds and found nothing, yet the footprints were undeniable. Days later, Andreas reported hearing strange sounds in the attic, as if someone or something was moving around up there. His search of the attic revealed nothing. Tools around the farm began disappearing, and a strange newspaper, one nobody in the family subscribed to, appeared on the doorstep. Even the family's maid quit abruptly 6 months before the killings, claiming the house was haunted. The Grubers, however, chose to stay. They dismissed these strange events as unnerving but not dangerous, unaware that something far worse was on the horizon. On the evening of March 31, 1922, a series of brutal unalivings unfolded at Hinterkaifeck. It's believed that the killer lured each family member into the barn one by one, where they were mercilessly struck down with a pickaxe. Andreas, Cäzilia, Viktoria, and Viktoria's young daughter were all unalived in the barn. Inside the house, the killer then took the lives of Viktoria's 2-year-old son, Josef, and the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had just begun working there that very day. What makes the crime even more disturbing is what happened next. For days after the murders, the killer stayed in the house. Neighbors noticed smoke rising from the chimney, and livestock were fed. Meals were prepared, and the family dog was seen roaming the farm. Whoever had committed the murders didn't leave immediately. Instead, they lived in the home among the bodies. Days passed before concerned neighbors arrived at the farm to check on the family. What they found horrified them beyond words. The bodies were discovered neatly stacked in the barn, covered with hay, while Joseph and Maria were found inside the house. The police were called, and an investigation began, but what followed was a series of dead ends and questions that would never be answered. The investigation into the Hinterkaifeck murders was plagued by mistakes and confusion. Forensic techniques were still in their infancy, and the crime scene was mishandled by police and townsfolk alike. Crucial evidence was lost, and the chaotic handling of the bodies only deepened the mystery. What little the authorities could determine was unsettling. The weapon, a pickaxe, had been used with precision. The killer had struck each victim in the head, causing instant unaliving in most cases. Even more disturbing, young Cäzilia, Viktoria's 7-year-old daughter, had shown signs of having been alive for several hours after the attack. Clumps of her own hair were found in her hands, indicating that she had torn at her scalp in terror before succumbing to her wounds. Despite an extensive search of the surrounding woods and villages, no trace of the killer was found. The only clues were the strange events leading up to the murders, the footprints, the sounds in the attic, the missing tools. but none of these provided concrete leads. Over the years, numerous theories have been proposed, each more chilling than the last. Some believe the killer was someone familiar to the family, possibly Victoria's estranged husband or a jealous lover. Others suggest it was a drifter or a farmhand, someone who knew the land and how to navigate the isolation of Hinterkaifeck. One particularly eerie theory revolves around Victoria's son, Joseph. It was rumored that Joseph was the product of an incestuous relationship between Victoria and her father, Andreas, a dark secret that had long haunted the family. Some speculated that someone close to the family, aware of this secret, had snapped and committed the unalivings as an act of retribution. But the most disturbing theory is that the killer was living in the house for weeks before the crime. The strange noises in the attic, the missing items, and the footprints leading only toward the house all suggest that someone may have been hiding in the shadows, watching the family, and waiting for the right moment to strike. The fact that the killer stayed after the murders, feeding the animals and living among the bodies, adds a layer of horror that defies explanation. It was as if the murderer had become part of the household, an invisible and deadly presence that haunted the Grubers even in unaliving. In the years that followed, Hinterkaifeck fell into ruin, and the farm was eventually demolished. Yet the story of the murders continued to haunt the region, whispered about in hushed tones by those who still lived nearby. The case remains one of the most infamous unsolved crimes in German history, a dark stain on the quiet Bavarian countryside. Some locals claim the land itself is cursed, and that the spirits of the Gruber family still linger in the fields and forests around Hinterkaifeck. Visitors to the site have reported hearing strange sounds, voices carried on the wind, and the faint echo of footsteps where none should be. The story of the Hinterkaifeck murders is not just one of unaliving, but of fear, suspicion, and the unknown. To this day, no one knows who committed the crime or why the family was targeted. It's a story that has been forgotten by history but continues to cast a long, dark shadow over those who dare to look into its depths. The Hinterkaifeck murders remain a mystery unsolved, a real-life nightmare that defies explanation. The isolation of the farm, the strange events leading up to the crime, and the killer's eerie behavior afterward make this case one of the most terrifying and perplexing in history. What happened in that barn, on that cold March night, will likely never be fully understood. The answers died with the Gruber family, their voices silenced by an unseen force. But as long as the story is told, the dark legacy of Hinterkaifeck will never be forgotten, forever haunting the pages of history with its eerie and unexplained horror.